This is probably one of my last opportunities as an artist to grasp onto that kind of success.
I don't know what I'll do after this album.
And the Grammy goes to Folklore, Taylor Swift!
Taylor Swift.
We have broken every single record you can break with this tour.
It is the biggest streaming day for any album released this year across all platforms. Congratulations.
That's all you guys.
Taylor Swift is obviously the biggest artist in the world, but there was a time when it seemed like she was starting to fall off. Now, I know Taylor Swift and the word flop should not be in the same sentence, but if she had any era that would be considered her flop era, it would be the Lover era. At least when it came out, because I know the Lover album ended up having a massive resurgence years later. Now, I love Lover by Taylor Swift, but I do feel a little bitter towards it because I feel like this album is the reason why Taylor will never give us pre-release singles again, which I'll get into. For this episode, let's talk about how Taylor Swift was able to get out of this flop era and ultimately become bigger than she ever was before. Before I get into it, if you are new here, welcome. Thank you so much for deciding to tune into this episode today. I'm so excited to talk about Taylor, talk about the Lover era. I love talking about Taylor. She's one of my favorite artists to make content about, so I'm super excited about this. And if you're not new, welcome back. Thank you for deciding to tune in again. Please make sure to follow the podcast on whatever platform you're using and rate it 5 stars. I will be so happy if I see the ratings go up after this episode. So before Lover, Taylor had 2 huge pop eras, 1989 and Reputation. 1989 debuted with over 1 million units and had 5 top 10 singles, and Reputation, even though it didn't have as many hit singles as 1989, it still had a massive debut of over 1 million units. By the way, I have a whole 1989 deep dive episode, so make sure to check that out and let me know if you want to see one on Reputation as well. When Taylor would drop pre-release album singles, her goal with the lead singles was always to mark a strong shift from her previous era. For example, with Red, we had her first kind of pop-leaning song, which was We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. With 1989, we had her first full-on pop single, which was Shake It Off. For Reputation, we had Look What You Made Me Do to kind of go along with the whole idea of the Reputation era, where she was focusing on her reputation. And she wanted to have this same shift with the Lover era. Reputation, which was the album that came before Lover, was a very dark themed album era, especially with the visuals. The album cover was black and white, and the visuals were pretty cohesive with the era, with each music video kind of portraying Taylor in a darker element, like she was wearing darker clothes, and in the Look What You Made Me Do video, there were snakes and she had the dark lipstick on. So for the Lover era, she wanted to do the complete opposite of that and enter this bright, colorful album era. I know Lover's lead single, Me, has a lot of haters, but again, Taylor's goal was always to mark a shift from the previous era, and that's definitely what she did with the song Me. Me is a very bright, cheesy, bubblegum pop song that didn't really showcase what Taylor Swift can offer as a songwriter. But again, she wanted to have that shift from the previous era. And out of any song from Lover, I guess Me would have made the most sense to her as the lead single because of that reason. There was so much hype leading into the Lover era because people knew that Taylor Swift was about to do something completely different from Reputation. And she had also just signed a brand new deal with Republic Records and Universal Music Group after being signed to Big Machine Records for so long. So people were excited about this new era. But Me definitely ruined that hype. The target audience was just confusing because it didn't seem like she was trying to target the same fans that she had from her previous albums. Like, it seemed like she was aiming for a younger audience. And it honestly didn't really work out for her. I mean, Me did debut at number 2, which, yeah, if you hear that a song debuts at number 2, that's amazing. But Taylor Swift couldn't even dethrone Lil Nas X's Old Town Road from number 1. Imagine if this happened today. Like, I know Old Town Road was a smash hit in 2019, and a lot of artists weren't able to dethrone him from number 1, but I do not think that there is any artist in 2025 that would be able to outchart Taylor Swift. Me kind of started the mess of the Lover era, and the second single, You Need to Calm Down, really didn't help either. You Need to Calm Down was definitely a better song than Me. It was a cute song for the summer and also for Pride Month because Taylor Swift is just screaming gay rights in that song and video. But with You Need to Calm Down, Taylor was also not able to dethrone Lil Nas X's Old Town Road from #1. I did enjoy You Need to Calm Down, but there wasn't really a strong single leading into the Lover era. So this was 2019, which at that point, the streaming era had already really taken off. Taylor was able to sell 1 million units in the first week of Reputation in 2017, which is when the streaming era was starting to get more popular, but physical sales were definitely still a thing. But after that, it just became harder and harder to get big debuts like Taylor was getting with her big pop albums. Lover debuted with 867,000 units in its first week, and 679,000 copies were pure sales. Again, because of everything going on with the streaming era really taking off, this was a really impressive debut, but it was Taylor's first album since Fearless to debut with less than 1 million units in the first week. Lover had sales that most artists cannot reach, but it is crazy to look back on this time because now Taylor Swift is debuting with over 2 million units in the first week. Despite Lover's commercial success, it seemed like Taylor was becoming less of a main pop girl than she was before. This is because the album sold less than her previous album, and there wasn't really a single that stuck with the album. The title track did pretty well and became a top 10 hit, but this was Taylor's first era that didn't really have much longevity. Again, I'm talking about when the album dropped, because I realized Lover ended up having a massive resurgence and became this big moment years later. But yeah, I'm just talking about when this album dropped. Taylor even tried making The Man a single and it didn't really take off. And then to make things worse, COVID happened, which really ruined the era because she couldn't even do any performances at that point or make the song Cruel Summer a single. Around this time, Taylor was coming to terms with the fact that she was becoming less of a main pop girl than she was before. In the documentary Miss Americana, which Taylor filmed when she was in her late 20s, we see her talk about the fact that she's approaching 30 and how the music industry is less accepting of women once they turn 30. It seemed like she was really coming to terms with the fact that she might lose her popularity as a pop artist.
This is probably one of my last opportunities as an artist to grasp onto that kind of success. So I want to work really hard.
Obviously, that was not the case, and she ended up getting bigger and bigger with every release. But how did this happen? So as I mentioned, the pandemic kind of prevented Taylor from promoting Lover and releasing more singles from the album and just made that era seem messy. And so instead of Taylor trying to promote the album throughout the pandemic, she decided to secretly record 2 albums. Taylor was also experimenting with a new way of dropping music. Instead of trying to have these big eras with pre-release singles and multiple hit singles after the album came out, she was just going to release the whole thing at once as a complete surprise. Folklore and Evermore were completely different from anything she had done before, because even when she was a country artist, she was trying to get mainstream hits and crossover hits into pop music. But with Folklore and Evermore, she was like, okay, I'm just gonna sit back and make these indie folk albums and hopefully they do well. And they did. I mean, Folklore sold 846,000 units in the first week as a surprise album. She literally announced the album the day it came out and was still able to sell this many copies. I think a big reason for this is that she was really just making music that was perfect for that specific time. I am a huge fan of upbeat dance pop music, but I remember feeling sad in 2020 when I would listen to dance pop songs because I would be like, why can I not hear this at the club right now? But Taylor genuinely made music that I just felt safe listening to. I just felt so much comfort with Folklore and Evermore, and I think everyone did. These albums were so important for her career because while her target audience was kind of confusing before, when she was trying to be a main pop girl, these albums got older fans of hers interested in her again. I'm sure a lot of you know people who would say things like, I only like Taylor Swift's old music. Well, these albums made those people interested in her again. And this was really key for her next move. It is crazy to think that within a year, she went from releasing Me to releasing the songs on Folklore, because they are just the complete opposite. Me was Kids Bop, while Folklore showed a way more mature side of her songwriting, where she was writing pretty much fictional stories. I think this even allowed her to gain a completely new set of listeners who were never fans of her before, but admired her songwriting through Folklore and Evermore. Folklore showed Taylor that she could debut with almost 1 million copies with a complete surprise album. And she kept that surprise element for every album afterwards. Even though after Folklore and Evermore, Taylor didn't release a total surprise album in the same way that she did with Folklore and Evermore when she announced those albums the same day they came out, she still kept that element of surprise. She stopped releasing pre-release singles and instead would announce her albums a couple months before their release and build up hype so that when they came out, people would be hearing the whole album at once, kind of going into it not knowing how it would sound. This is why Taylor is able to debut with over 1 million units again, because she nailed that element of surprise and is just so good at building hype for her projects. But if it weren't for Folklore, I don't think Taylor would be approaching her album eras with that same element of surprise. And I don't think she would be debuting with over 1 million units. Taylor's re-recordings also played a massive role in her becoming a bigger artist now than she ever was before. While the general public wasn't really on Taylor Swift's side before the Reputation era when she was feuding with Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, I feel like during this re-recording situation, the general public was, for the most part, on her side. When Taylor opened up and shared how she felt about Scott Borchetta selling her old master recordings to Scooter Braun, I feel like most people were on Taylor's side and were like, wait, yeah, that sucks. You should absolutely be able to own your own music. You made the music. Even though we know Taylor was absolutely devastated during this time, her deciding to re-record her first 6 albums was a sign of her strength. Taylor deciding to do this was just a true symbol of artist empowerment, because she was expressing something that not a lot of people would talk about. Like, people didn't really know the importance of artists owning their masters. But because of Taylor, so many artists now go into their record deals and stuff with the intention of owning their work. I think Taylor starting her re-recordings with Fearless was so smart. This was her first album that had big mainstream hits like You Belong With Me and Love Story. Similar to how Folklore and Evermore resulted in older fans of Taylor Swift becoming fans of her again, I feel like that same thing happened with Fearless, Taylor's version. Those same people who would say that they only liked Taylor Swift for her country music had no reason to not tune in. I mean, she was re-recording an old country album. I feel like this is why the re-recording that followed Fearless, which was Red that same year, was so popular, because all of those fans were tuned in again. Red in 2012 was an era where we started to see Taylor Swift lose a lot of fans because she wasn't making a complete country body of work. Like, she was starting to experiment with pop music. But I think her re-recording that album and releasing it after Folklore and Evermore and Fearless allowed people to genuinely appreciate that album, even though they might have been haters of that album before. This is because the general public was now on her side and people wanted to see her succeed. Taylor really leaned into nostalgia with these albums and treated them like brand new eras with new photo shoots, new album covers, and new songs, the vault tracks. So by the time she released Midnights in 2022, she had a bunch of new fans who weren't really paying attention to her during eras like Reputation and Lover. So she was able to debut with over 1 million units again. She leaned into nostalgia even more with her Eras tour, which became the biggest tour of all time, grossing over $2 billion. It became a true celebration of all of Taylor's iconic eras, and it was really a space where people who were fans of Taylor in the early days of her career could watch her perform again. I'm sure so many people who went to the Eras tour hadn't gone to a Taylor tour since her country music days. But again, so many of those people became interested in her again with Folklore, Evermore, and the re-recordings, so they were down to watch her perform live again. While Taylor believed herself that she was going to fall off after the Lover era, Folklore, Evermore, and her re-recordings gave her the confidence to pursue her album rollouts with the intention of being a massive main pop girl. She really gets bigger and bigger with every single release now, and that's her goal. Like, she wants to sell more units than the previous albums, which is just crazy to think about because, yeah, during the Lover era, she wasn't really expecting to become a big main pop girl again. 2020 was a very experimental year for her, where she wasn't only experimenting with a new sound, but she was also experimenting with a new way of releasing music. Because of those surprise albums doing so well, she was able to figure out what works best for her, and now she incorporates that element of surprise in all of her releases. And because of that, she is able to outdo herself every single time because she builds genuine hype. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of the Bop Bible. I really hope you enjoyed it and that you are all streaming the life of a showgirl. Again, make sure to follow the podcast on whatever platform you're using and rate it 5 stars. That is so important. And also check out my short form content on my other social media profiles. But thank you guys again, and I will see you in the next episode.